I was an apprentice horse trainer when I was a teenager, and around the time I was 16, I'd had my first personal horse for about a year. It was when I was 16 that my friends and I, we first got the idea to just cross the state of Utah, but we were kids. We never even did that. We had no way of doing that. But I just never let it go. I kept thinking about it and expanding and thinking about, what about this? What if I did a trip through these states? And before I knew it, I had an outline to cross 25 states and go all the way across the country and back, and it grew over time, and it later grew into this opportunity to show off wild horses. I don't think the most rewarding and well encompassed human experiences of all the people that have lived in this life are the ones that spent their entire lives in a bubble. I'm the last person on this planet to go and tell someone not to put everything on the line and go work hard and learn what you need to learn. If there's something you want to do, if it's bigger than you, it's probably worth doing. And that's what I tell people. And that was the case with me.
So welcome to Utah Stories. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to have this guest on. I discovered Jake about 5 months ago on Instagram. We always look for really interesting, unique Utah stories. And thanks so much for joining me, Jake.
Thank you for having me.
So what inspired you to decide to take your horses and just get up and go across the United States?
Yeah, it really wasn't just one all of a sudden thing for me. I was an apprentice horse trainer when I was a teenager, and around the time I was 16, I'd had my first personal horse for about a year, and she was this little gray mare Mustang who was pretty green broke. She didn't know much, and I didn't know much when we first got going. And I always said she was the horse that kind of got me going in my career and taught me the most as far as learning how to work with horses. And she was my first experience being around Mustangs, around wild-born horses that were rounded up by the government. And it was through working with her and then the trainers that were around me in our barn up in Heber City that I was exposed to working with wild horses and seeing, some of the differences and just learning so many things through them that I kind of grew a little bit of an attachment, a bias. And it was when I was 16 that my friends and I, we first got the idea to just cross the state of Utah, but we were kids. We never even did that. We had no way of doing that. But I just never let it go. I kept thinking about it and expanding and thinking about, what about this? What if I did a trip through these states? And before I knew it, I had an outline to cross 25 states and go all the way across the country and back, and it grew over time, and it later grew into this opportunity to show off wild horses.
Yeah, and so your Instagram page is called Year of the Mustang, and you anticipated you could do 25 states back and forth in 1 year. It took you a little bit longer
Correct.
than that, right? But I mean, you have to avoid highways, but you can't avoid towns. You got to be in a town when you camp, correct? To have support and be able to buy groceries. And so how did you map it out?
Yeah, it totally depends. And the nature of my trip and how I did it evolved as we went along. And when I first left when I had all three horses with me, I was prepared to be pretty much entirely self-sufficient. And we were looking for places on public land to camp out with the horses every night. And the further I went along, the more I found it necessary to be able to rely on local people as I went along, whether that was in rural areas, urban areas, whatever that is. The reality of the continental U.S. is that the further east you go, the more densely populated it is. Mm-hmm. And the more densely populated it is, the less public land you have to work with. So that was kind of the evolution of the trip. The further out east I went, the more I was, having to learn how to connect with people, how to meet strangers and network and get my story out there and pick up the help I needed. And that's how I kept myself fed, as opposed to when I started, where I was packing all my food with me. And we'd go back and forth, sometimes we'd have a night here and there, we're camping on public land again. So it was always different. It was every situation you can imagine. I was mostly just looking after my horses' most basic needs, making sure they had feed, water, and somewhere to stay overnight. So that was kind of the premise of how we set up our day-to-day, how we're going to make the next 20 miles, 25 miles, whatever it's going to be to the next stop. Does it have what we need? and spacing all that out so we could move the direction we were wanting to go. And sometimes that took us on highways, right down city streets, or up in the mountains on trails, whatever it was that got us there. We've done it.
So did you prepare beforehand every stop that you were, or were you just hoping that there would be a place where your horses could be, like, would you corral them, or would you sometimes just let them graze, or how did you manage the logistics of that?
So it kind of goes back to what I'm saying. It depends on the type of place we're staying in. If we're on public lands, they do what's called staking out, which is a big stake driven into the ground, tied to a rope, which connects to a front leg of a horse. That way they can go around, they can graze the land. So that's kind of our backcountry solution, right? They can drink, they can roll, lay down, whatever they want to do, but they can't wander off. Mm-hmm. And that's necessary because often you're in places that are, how many thousands of square miles wide, right, before you're going to hit a fence. So that's how you do public lands. And in my case, when we were setting up in private situations, we were sticking them out in people's pastures and their stalls, barns, corral, whatever they had available for us. So I was typically looking for people who had that sort of a setup. As far as planning prior to the trip goes, I had the general order of the states laid out and the path that we would take through, because the route was so large and so extensive. It was over 300 different nights stays and over 400 days total.
Was it just you?
And it was just me.
Wow.
Right.
That's awesome.
So that's way too much to be able to organize, especially because plans change, routes change, and this allowed me to have an ability to be able to change plans and adjust course based on the environments and the places I was coming into. Someone tells me, oh, this is a stretch of highway you don't want to be on, find a different way. Enough people tell you that, you find a different way, and that might mean you had to change course for a couple of days, so who knows. And that's why I was typically not setting up the actual, every detailed route more than a day or 2 or 3 days before, depending on where I knew I was going to be landing for those nights.
Did you have somebody helping you with logistics?
A lot of it. I had family at home who were helping me keep people and contacts organized, just through over the computer and whatnot. But I was also meeting people along the way who were very connected in local areas, and they'd help me out through a portion, set up a portion of a state or a couple counties or whatever it is we were doing. And very often it was word of mouth. It was, who do you know 20 miles that way? And I was just so cool. Day to day, it was setting up the next stop. Because very often when you're dealing with farmers and ranchers, horse people, the sort of people I need to be able to set my horses up, they often know somebody 20 miles away. It's very common when you're in those sorts of parts of the U.S. that you can typically find a connection with a trusted person. So that's the cool thing about our country that I don't think everyone realizes is still very much alive with us.
Well, it's like you got the Pony Express Trail that was in existence for, 100 years? Like a long time. Mm-hmm. And that trail, now you go out to Camp Floyd in the West Desert and it still says Pony Express Trail. Mm-hmm. Did you follow that at all?
I did. Yep. I followed a chunk of it across the state of Wyoming.
Oh, cool.
And a lot of that is where the Pioneer Trail, the California Trail, and the Pony Express Trail are all one across here through central Wyoming until it diverges at the western side of the state. So I was riding a lot of the Pony Express Trail for a couple weeks.
Can we show a clip of Jake from Instagram? You shall. I probably could pull it up, actually. That would be the easiest. I think the thing that made me really gravitate to this is I traveled across Europe with a bicycle and all the pannier bags, and I tried to be as self-sufficient as I could, but almost every day I had to find a town to buy groceries because I was limited by weight. But I was so amazed by how kind people were along the way. Like anything I needed. Oh, you're American, you're by yourself. Oh, what do you need? Cheese and bread and early gift, whatever I wanted. They just were so accommodating, and I wondered, is this like a European thing, or is this just like you're in your 20s and you're by yourself type of thing, where was everybody just super nice?
It very well could be the second one you're bringing up, because that was very much how it was for me. I carried, in the beginning of the trip where I was, traveling in the backcountry every day, I left carrying 2 weeks of food at a time. And then I got further into it, 3 months in, and I was carrying 10 days worth of food at a time, and then 4 days worth of food at a time. And I carried maybe 3 days worth of food just as a backup, because I stopped even thinking about where my meals were coming from. It just always landed in my lap somehow.
Yeah.
And, I'm super blessed for that. I was so grateful for how that went. But
so I'm on your Instagram page. Can you recommend one of these that kind of shows what the lifestyle was like?
25 states, half of the states in the country. That's going to be a thing, isn't it? Oh my gosh, guys, this is it. We're coming up on our last state.
Is that Wyoming?
that is, that's coming into Idaho.
God, that's so cool. And you just don't see anything as far as your eye can see, pretty much, right?
Yeah,
Welcome to state number 25. Idaho. We did it. 25 states. You ready to go home, bud? It's like I don't even remember what home is anymore. 25 states, baby. We're going home. I can't even describe how good this feels.
Was that a huge relief when you got to that point where you could see that your trip was almost done? And
yeah, it was definitely a sink-in moment for me, where it was, I'm just pointing myself to my hometown now, which was only a week away, just over a week away at that point. It was, the next stop is home, That was that moment where it kind of dawned on me, and that was the last state on our list that we were chasing. So
when you're alone day after day, did you have time periods where you're just all alone for 3, 4, 5 days, stretches at a time?
Yeah.
Was that hard for you to do? Like I found that personally really difficult.
Yeah, I totally understand why. I think I'm one of those personalities, though, that is kind of predisposed for that sort of lifestyle. My longest stretch where I didn't see a single other person, like no other sign of human beings, was about 4 days in the Sangre de Cristo range in New Mexico. And that was just beautiful mountain country, just me and the horses. I didn't see anything, not a plane, not a truck in the distance or anybody. And I loved it. It really does suit me, honestly. But I, had the opposite, where it was, day in and day out, a new set of faces, a new family to stay with, new people to meet and speak with and share my story with, and I enjoy that as well. So I wouldn't say I'm one or the other, but I enjoy actually a lot of the time spent alone. So.
Yeah, I think there's something special, especially with being alone with animals, that you really have a connection with.
Yeah.
Like I have to take my dogs up to Mill Creek every couple of days, or I just start to feel like this burden, like running a business and having all this work to do is a burden rather than feeling lucky. I feel so lucky when I can go up in the mountains and be alone with my dogs. And did you develop some really deep connection with your horses during that period of time?
I absolutely would say it's different. And I spent plenty of time with horses prior to the trip, training and shoeing horses and all that. But there's something about being up there in that saddle for 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and then you're still not done. Then you're watching them all night long, to make sure they're okay. You think about them every single day, all of the time. So yeah, it's a whole nother way of living that even just regular horsemen I don't think really quite experiences, just because they were my way of getting around. They were part of my survival in a way. And I think it's interesting, like I spent a good time growing up teaching myself survival skills and spending a lot of time in the backcountry by myself, which I think is what led into what I was describing earlier. But you create your society, and that's what a lot of people who go through survival situations tell you. You create a society. It's like in Castaway with Tom Hanks, right? He's got the beach ball. Mm-hmm. And as human beings, we find a way to make our society in whatever situation we're in. And I think for me, that was my horses. They were my society. They were my tribe.
So you had 3 of them?
For a good chunk of the trip. I had just those 2 geldings for most of the trip.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did they ever give you trouble? Like, were they ever like, this is too much. I don't want to do this. We definitely had our moment. They're horses. They've got their own ideas. And you think about, we do this day in and day out. Horses are just like us. Like, mm-hmm. They have their off days, their days that
or they're just not feeling it, and you have to overcome some of those things, right? Because that's just not how life works. You don't always feel like doing what you want to do, but being able to be understanding in those moments and be patient and meet them where they're at, that's, what helps us overcome things. And being persistent, right? You come to an obstacle and a thing a horse isn't sure about, and you don't back up from those things. You encourage them, you be the confident leader. And I think that's the biggest role I played, right? Everyone says, well, the horse does everything, right? In this situation, it's like the horse wouldn't leave his pasture if you didn't get your butt out of bed in the morning, right? And if you didn't throw a saddle on. So as much as my horses are my heroes, you also have to believe in yourself massively to accomplish something like this. And that, right? Having, like you said, crossed Europe on bike, that's, it's you, right? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day.
Yeah. And I also found when I was on that journey, mood swings, like you really notice your own mood swings, and they go from way high and elated to, at least for me, sometimes they would go pretty low, and I would be like, how did I get myself into this? How long am I gonna have to camp now? I can't get this thing working out, or I just broke my derailleur and now I gotta find a bike shop. Did you have some real low periods besides the highs?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, like we were talking about how I had 3 horses for the first quarter of the trip, and the little gray mare I was talking about in the beginning, she's older now. She's 18 years old, and that's quite old for a horse to be doing a trip like this. And this is a difficult trip for horses of any age, right? And aside from them being Mustangs, she is, smaller than the other 2. It got to a point where it was a little too much for her to continue on. She was starting to lose weight, and for the sake of her health, I was like, she needs to be done. So we're going to find a way to have someone trailer her back to Utah. And I got that all organized, but it was still one of the hardest things in my life to send my best friend home on what I felt like was, a big complete family team, and now we gotta do the right thing here and make the hard choice. And I had to rethink a lot of the things I was doing. I had to send half the gear with her because I was now down a pack horse, and it was definitely a struggle moment for me in the trip, thinking about how we were only a quarter of the way through, and now I'm already having a horse go home. And it makes you question, like, we have so much to go. Are we really going to be able to pull this off with 2 horses? So I guess that's a comparable moment.
Yeah. Did you have any encounters with wildlife where you were freaked out?
Yeah, we had a few. I had a run-in with a mountain lion in that same location in New Mexico, in that same mountain range. And I went down to the Vermejo River to wash my dishes from dinner. So it's dark. It was November. And I'm leaning over the river, and I look up across the bank. I got my headlamp on, and this little mountain lion pokes his head out through the grass on the opposite bank from me. And my first thoughts to my horses, I got them staked out, all 3 of them in the meadow behind me. So I skip on some stones, and I go hooting and hollering and just yelling, and I chase him up this hill, and there he goes running up. And I didn't sleep great that night because I was thinking about it all night long, how he just, pretty confidently walked right. It's not a wide river, it's just maybe
how little was
25
was
feet
the
away.
Mountain lion?
Not little. I say little because not a big male, but he was an adult. He was.
I mean, could he kill you?
Maybe. I don't think he was brave enough to take on a horse. Maybe, but that's one predator here in North America. You think about. I'm less concerned with bears and those sorts of things. You know how to handle yourself.
It seems like wolves would be probably the scariest, wouldn't they? A wolf pack.
Wolves generally avoid people, is my experience, and wolves generally know that things like a horse is too much to handle. Right? Wolves like prey that they can pester until it's exhausted and go after. And they're in more limited areas. Mountain lions are everywhere in the West. Right? They're all over the place. So. Yeah, definitely. I had a run-in with a black bear in Virginia, but again, same thing. Black bears are just looking for food. It was going around. We were camped in a state park, and he was just walking around camp, probably looking for dumpsters to get into, that sort of thing. But yeah, I had a finger on the trigger in that one instance, just while I was looking at him in the dark. And
so you had a gun?
I did,
to protect yourself.
Yeah,
That's
in most states, I had my gun with me. Yeah.
So before you went, did your parents and your friends think you were nuts to do this?
It was definitely a shock. And I think, some of the very first people I ever told, we were kind of like, oh, yeah, sure, bud. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. But that's what they tell me now anyways. And then he actually went and did it. And and it was kind of that sort of thing. But I was shocked by how many people were so supportive from the get-go.
Yeah, your homecoming is amazing. We'll have to play that clip in the edited version because the whole town came out to welcome you back home.
Yeah, it was really fun riding back into my hometown. And, yeah, lots of people participated and supported in that, and yeah, it was cool to see how many people believed in me, in contrast to how you make yourself feel, because when you're planning it all the way, you're thinking like, oh, what are people going to say when you say you're leaving your business and everything you've built, and you got a stable life and everything, and you're just going to throw all that out to go live on the road. So that's kind of, I think, where my head was in the months leading up to when I started kind of announcing what I was doing. And then I was just blown away by how many people were like, go live your dream, man.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so cool how many people followed you on Instagram and, were cheering you on along the way. And so I got to ask, so this sort of Wild West way of living, traveling by horseback, experiencing the vast, wide expanse of land, that's something I love to do too. Do you think we lose something in society with our modern way of life? Are we out of touch with those incredible ways that people were living 150 years ago, being much more in touch with both animals and nature? Do you feel like when you come back you miss that life, or you want that back again, or how do you feel?
I do, because I grew up this way, but I think it's because uncertainty can and has the potential to create trial and error and tribulation. But I don't think the most rewarding and well-encompassed human experiences of all the people that have lived in this life are the ones that spent their entire lives in a bubble. And I think the way humanity has moved with all the, especially in our society and all the abundance we tend to have, a lot of people in our country and in our way of life, that it's easy to kind of live in a protective bubble. Not that everything goes perfect for everyone to time, but compared to your ancestors and thinking about how your ancestors lived, to refer to what you're describing, it doesn't even compare, right? The amount of things that are out of your control, and it's Mother Nature, right? You don't decide if it rains today or not, and is the rain going to determine whether you are going to go do what you set out to do or not? Are you going to stop caring about that sort of thing? Or if it snows, or if it's blowing 45-mile-per-hour winds, and if it's
yeah,
that's just
is
Mother Nature's examples. There's other examples, right?
Yeah, and we lived in such a protected world with these very secure roofs over our head with carpet, and then only when you escape all that and expose yourself to the elements of nature do you really understand where we've come from, and do you understand like how connected we were with nature and the land and the environment. And I think it's it's amazing that you decided to do that. I think it's so cool.
It's familiarity too, right? Not knowing whether you're going to have a meal that night, or you're going to have to figure something out, or whether you're going to be sleeping in a bed or sleeping on the ground. And that's something that is just so ingrained into us, I think, in the modern world, that we're going to have those things somehow, some way, and living a life where those things aren't certain.
And I think more people should do that. Like it was actually a girl I met in a class who I studied with a couple times. She had come back from Europe alone, and she's like, "You ought to do that." And I'm like, "I don't think so." But then it kind of just festered. It just like the whole idea, kind of like you had this, the idea just sort of gripped me. And then I realized, I am in a bubble. I'm in this like way of life and way of living that's so common, typical. Why not do something different? And then you realize you change from an experience like that. You really realize how big the world is and how like generous people are and how cool it is to just get away from cities. And I suppose you had all those realizations as well, huh?
Absolutely, yeah. And I kind of knew what my preference was even before I left. But when you've got, horses to look after, and they thrive in that environment, right? Because that's where they come from. So for their sakes, right, I start, leaning towards that way. I'm always like, what's the most rural way we can get through? Is there any way we can do this on trails? Because we've done plenty of days riding the highways or riding through towns all days. Those are the days that wear on you the hardest, right? As funny as it is to to see me ride through your horse, or riding on my horses through a town and everything. Those are the days where it's like, you're just mentally drained at the end of the day because of how much is going on in that environment. And when you're just out on a trail all day in the mountain, it's almost the opposite. It's a healing experience.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks so much for coming, Jake. I really appreciate it. You're in our current issue that was supposed to come out today of Utah Stories. I wanted to give you a copy. It got stuck in Fruita because of the snowstorm.
Oh.
So the truck's going to be here in another hour. But I want to get you some copies because I really appreciate your story and what you did, and I would encourage more people to get out in the open just to see the incredible amount of space. Would you encourage people to do what you did, or is that a little bit hardcore and only for people who've trained for years?
The way I do things, isn't going to be for everyone, and absolutely, working with horses and doing things with horses takes a certain level of education. But I'm the last person on this planet to go and tell someone not to put everything on the line and go work hard and learn what you need to learn. If there's something you want to do, if it's bigger than you, it's probably worth doing. And that's what I tell people. And that was the case with me. And you should have something bigger than you that you're pursuing. So, yeah.
Agree. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching, everybody. This has been a Utah Stories production. This is our February issue. Our March issue comes out tomorrow. If you want to subscribe to Utah Stories and become a member, you can help us provide this content and interview more awesome people like Jake. And thank you again, Jake, for coming on. Appreciate it. Okay, and leave your comments. And as always, like, share, subscribe. And you can subscribe to Utah Stories by visiting utahstories.com for $5 a month, or $8 a month if you want both our faces and Utah Stories magazines, and if you want access to all the content behind the paywall. All right, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend.